Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Open World Dialogue. Before we begin, I just simply want to talk about something that we're going to be doing tomorrow as a group. So, tomorrow for International Women's Day, we're teaming up with Benefit Cosmetics for a charitable live stream event. They will contribute $5 for our hashtag March for WIGI campaign, WIGI's ongoing effort to highlight and celebrate women, non-binary, or femme-identifying persons in the gaming industry. So join us tomorrow, March 8th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, or slash, I should say, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to drop a follow. Join us for some fun and show your support. So now onto our regularly scheduled panel. So women are gamers, developers, creators, and more. From reality to the virtual worlds we inhabit, women have been trailblazers in this industry. What we talk about typically is just how few women are in positions of power or how few women are visible as main characters in games. These issues seem connected to each other, but with more women in the industry, the hope is more visibility in games too. Until then, we focused on the now and how impactful women are to the industry. So how important is it to have authentic representation? Who's done it well? And what can be done to improve it? And how can women in the gaming industry continue to be trailblazers and pave the way to support and push representation forward? Today we have three incredible guests who will discuss all of these questions and more to help us understand the connection between representation and the triumphs we make in the gaming world. First up, we have Kate Edwards. Kate is an award-winning 29-plus-year veteran of the game industry and CEO and principal consultant of Geography, a consultancy which innovated content culturalization, in games, as well as the CXO and co-founder of Jet Setters, a film tourism app. She's also the former executive director to the International Game Developers Association and Global Game Jam. In addition to serving in several board and advisory roles, she's a geographer, writer, and corporate strategist. In 2021, she was included in the Forbes 50 over 50 Vision list and was also inducted into the Women in Games Hall of Fame. Next up, we have Jane Chung Hoffacker. Jane is an award-winning producer and CEO of Incredible Dream, a game studio on a mission to bring people to the table through shared adventure. An early career crisis and battle with depression led Jane to pursue a lifelong passion for gaming. They spent over a decade growing some of the biggest franchises in gaming, including Guitar Hero, Arcane, / League of Legends. Today, Jane's pursuing their dream of helping more people see themselves in games. And last but not least, we have cseelye. Christina is the global CEO of Maximum Entertainment, a worldwide company that designs and backs exceptional experiences through a full spectrum ecosystem covering all aspects of video games, such as creation, publishing, transmedia, sales, and operations. She's a seasoned and knowledgeable technology specialist, as well as a valuable asset for global products, digital change, and fostering startups. Christina founded Maximum Games in 2009, where she bootstrapped her way to leading one of the fastest growing businesses in America and a top 20 global game publisher. She launched Modus Games in 2018 to provide AAA publishing services to the best independent developers around the world. After numerous successful launches and mergers, Cortex AB acquired Maximum Games in 2021, and Christina became the CEO of the entire organization in early 2022. Now in 2023, she's relaunching the fully integrated company as Maximum Entertainment, listed on NASDAQ First North Growth Market in Sweden. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm so excited to talk about this topic. For me, there's no surprise from the people who know me, but I'm always a skeptic of what it's like to be a woman in this industry. Though I am not fully integrated full time, my experiences here at WIGI has been nothing but a joy. But I'm always hearing these experiences that aren't always so great. So I want to highlight and understand, of course, some of those issues that you may have had, but how you've come on the other side to not only create your own space in this industry, but also how you're helping other people navigate these worlds. Let's just start with a foundational question. I always love those. What inspired you to pursue a career in the video game industry, and how did you get your start? Anyone can go, by the way. No worries.
I'll jump in. Mine's pretty straightforward because I did not aspire to work in the game industry. I originally wanted to be an astronaut, and then I wanted to be a conceptual artist for Lucasfilm because I wanted to work on a Star Wars film. And so I went through that path academically, and then ended up in geography because I love maps. I love making maps. I could use my artistic skills for cartography. Love travel, love culture, and so I just decided to go that direction instead, and just said, well, the creative side is just going to be a hobby, something I do on the side. But then as things happened through my geography background, eventually I went into Microsoft as a cartographer on Encarta Encyclopedia way back 30 years ago. And for those who don't know what that is, that was basically the precursor to Wikipedia online. And through that interaction at Microsoft, I eventually ended up working there for 13 years, and where I created an internal team that basically enabled me to help all the products at Microsoft avoid making political and cultural mistakes that disrespect the customer and get us into big trouble overseas. And so through doing that work at the company, that's how I started working on games, because that all of the games at Microsoft fell under my responsibility in that capacity. So ended up working on all the Xbox games, the Halos and Fables and Age of Empires and all of that stuff back in those days, and really found my true calling. Doing this, what I call culturalization work on games, was really it. It was a confluence of everything I love: creative media, technology, geography, and culture. Everything came together in that kind of job that I was able to create and basically make up while I was at Microsoft. So I walked backwards into the game industry. I've always been a gamer ever since Pong came out, because that's how old I am. I was 7 years old when Pong showed up. Yeah, it was basically a sort of a perfect made job that I didn't realize until years later.
I have so many questions, but I just want to keep going with Kate and learn more about, because I love the concept of culturalization of video games, because I think it's so important, not just in the creation of the game, but also in the marketing of the game. Often within the industry, we talk about localization, but localization is not sufficient. We have to really look at how is this game going to be received, both from a gameplay standpoint, but also product positioning and marketing. And so I have a lot of questions. I think it's so interesting of that approach in video game, but also probably you could call it backed into the industry as well. I did not start out thinking that I was going to be running a video game company, but really I have always been in consumer technology. I live in Northern California, so everybody here is in technology. And so it was really by default that I ended up within the world of tech. But my passion has always been around bringing consumer technology to market and bringing people's creativity to market and making sure it was monetized successfully and making sure that we're making enough money and getting a good enough commercial result in order to continue to allow people to reach their creative goals and do what they need to do. And so I'm more on the business side of video games more than on the creative side of video games. But in order to make money, you have to have both. And in order to keep it going, you have to have both. And so I started just brokering some deals, bringing content that had launched in Europe that hadn't launched in the US, bringing that to market here about 12, 13 years ago in the US. And then your personality takes over. You just build a company and then all of a sudden here you are. So it's not that easy, but that is how we backed into it. My standard answer when people ask me how I got into this is that I'm a national ranked Fortnite player, but that is not true. That is usually said to see how many laughs I get at that, because I have in no way have the time to be competitive at a national level on that. But yeah, I really enjoy the industry now and super happy to be able to be in the position that I am, where I get to make decisions on what games come to market. So that's important.
Oops. Yep. Oh my God, that's so amazing. And I know what you mean with Fortnite. I remember the first time I played, I was so proud that I beat out all the players, and I told my husband about it, and he's, honey, you were playing against bots. I'm like, okay. But yeah, I feel like I share a lot in common, with the other two. And that I think when I was going through high school and college and all that stuff, like video games wasn't a career like forefront in my mind. It wasn't a possibility that I grew up thinking about, even though I played throughout my life. And I actually started off my career in private equity in the finance track. My bio kind of briefly describes it, but had an early life crisis where I realized that a lot of things was happening. I'm still new at sharing this part of my life, but I seriously got depressed by just things that were happening in my life. And for me, it was a matter of survival and just really figuring out, like, what do I want to do with my life that's going to be fulfilling. And I'm very fortunate that I had my mom to inspire me, but I also just felt if I'm going to be doing something, I want to be passionate about it. And that's when I thought about my passion in gaming. And that's when I became super interested in, hey, other people are having a great career in this, like I could do that too. So that really got me going in that direction. And I went back to school for it and all this other stuff because I couldn't figure out how to break in. It was super hard. Eventually, I think at the end of the day, I got my first break through a professor that I studied with, and he was just really willing to make an introduction for me. I was like doing a bunch of freelance gigs as a game designer in small indie shops, and it was hard, paid peanuts, and was not like, it was just so hard. But it was that first break, the professor that made that intro for me that made such a big difference.
See, I think what I love the most about hearing each of these stories is that the common thread is that it just happened. You were all doing the things that you were doing that was going to lead you there, but it just happened into it. And for me, I think, and maybe for other people who are trying to get in this industry full time, we so often hear, just go for it and go for that industry. And then sometimes that just doesn't work out. And you need to realize you can still build up all of your skills and the things that you're interested in elsewhere, and then take your talents to gaming, which is a hard pill to swallow, if I'm being honest. It's very hard to swallow that and know not necessarily going to start off that way. And so it's nice to hear, but also a hard one to take in. I know everybody has dealt with challenges. I would love to know, whatever you feel comfortable with sharing, how have you navigated that? I'm sure that you've had something that happened in your life where you're like, just didn't feel right. I don't feel happy about what happened. And how did you navigate that? And it could be anything related to, because I know, Christina, you said, for example, you're in the business side. So I know you're dealing with some nonsense over there as well. So whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's really interesting about what we're all doing now is it's all pretty entrepreneurial. We all started something in order to really make our way within the industry. And I think that's one of the things that is really important in I would say not just video games, but tech at large, is you find your own way by making your own way, by going and doing that entrepreneurial and not relying on big businesses to change their culture or systems or whatever in order to accommodate you. Just build a new one and do it the way that you want to. And I think from an entrepreneur standpoint, you enter the conversation differently than you do if you enter the conversation as an employee. So I think that I bypassed a lot of whatever you want to call the bias, that whether it was purposeful, not purposeful, whatever, I'll give everybody the benefit of the doubt. But you get over a lot of that coming in as an entrepreneur because you're just having a different conversation. And so I will say that my whole experience as an entrepreneur has been pretty great. And I didn't have a lot of problems actually being a woman on the entrepreneurial side. That said, what I will tell you is that it wasn't until much later in my career where I was raising money, where I was working in potential investors, where I was working with funds and different banks and things like that. That was probably the first time in my career where I really felt it. And it was interesting. This is many years ago now. I was looking back, Maximum Games, we were exploring raising money. And I went around and met with a bunch of venture firms, and they always had a girl in the room. And they knew that I was going to be there. And so there was always a girl in the room in the meeting. And I always said to whoever was there, hey, good job being a girl in venture. How's it going? I would always ask. And they would like, I'm just an associate. They just brought me in, like literally bar none. There was not one woman who was on the other side of the table within a venture environment that was a decision maker. And I think that I felt more problems and pressure once I got to the point where I was actually working outside the industry, working with investment. And I think that's a really huge problem for the industry and for technology at large, because for women to be able to make their way and start their own path, they have to be able to have access to funding, and they have to be able to have access to capital. And that is still just as difficult as a market as it is for women who are working within the video game industry. And so I think it's really important to fix both problems, both the capitalization and the finance bro world, as well as the women making their way in tech.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. I thoroughly agree, I think. And I feel like you're doing a lot to change that and being that decision maker on the other side of the table, which is awesome. And I echo that sentiment. I think seeing more women in decision making capacities as investors, I think, is powerful and can end up changing a lot. And I'm not saying all of them have to invest in women-owned businesses, right? I think just the perspective that they bring to that table will enrich it. I think to answer your question about, Robin, about like challenges and how you've overcome them, I've thought about this a bit, and I don't know, I will rattle off a bunch of challenges I've faced throughout my career, but I will say up front that like I've not always handled them, right? Like they've happened and it's taken years to process, and I'm still in the process of handling it. It's just, I think it takes some time, especially for me, to understand the things that are happening and what I want to do about it, which I think is challenging because, and I would say, I don't think anybody out there should feel pressure to instantly know what to do when something happens. But it's always the typical stuff, right? There's harassment that you can experience or the feeling of being spoken over. There's also stuff that like probably is typical, but not really thought about, like feeling lost on how to be effective in this environment that you feel very foreign to, or feeling very confused why certain peers get promoted over you, or feeling very exhausted at being so hyper productive and not feeling hyper rewarded. There's all these feelings, or like even awkward feelings, like how do you develop that relationship with your boss, your male boss, without seeming like you're trying to hit on him or that you're open to things. But likewise, how do you hang out with your coworkers and say good job without signaling to that coworker that you're open or anything, like, or not giving that impression? I think there's a lot that being a minority in any situation makes it hard to navigate, that are just, you don't really end up talking about it and you just process it over time.
All great points. One thing that I would add as well, there's a lot of challenges too that I can think about. Being harassed with death threats and everything by Gamergate for over 2 years when I was running the International Game Developers Association, because hey, being a woman in a position of power within the game industry during that time was not fun, because it instantly made you a target. I don't want to focus on that necessarily. We can always come back to that if necessary. But I think one of the challenges that I find a lot of people facing, which, because I do mentor, as I'm sure we all do, mentor a lot of people coming into this industry, a lot of women and underrepresented people, it's having the courage to be confident in an idea that you have that may be actually a really valid idea. And like when I was back at Microsoft, back in those early days, like 25 years ago, is when I created what I called the geopolitical strategy team at Microsoft. But it took me 7 months. We had this big incident that happened that basically exposed a huge risk area for the company, where two siloed teams at the company did not talk to each other because they had no reason to, and yet they both committed the same geopolitical mistake that got us into huge trouble in a country in East Asia, big trouble. And it showed me that this is a risk exposure area that relates to what I do that nobody's addressing. And so I wrote a proposal to create this team to address this kind of stuff across all the company. And I had to pitch it to different VPs. I ended up over 7 months pitching it to 5 different VPs. And yeah, the first 4 were very discouraging because no, we don't really need this. There's these guys in power. They're all these US guys, and they just had a very narrow focus. Yeah, we don't really need that. We don't need to think about that. And keeping in mind that 25 years ago, the tech sector, in terms of its receptiveness to inclusivity, was very different than it is today. I'm not saying today is perfect, but it was a hell of a lot different back then. And so but the thing is, I kept being persistent because something was telling me, not just internally, but also the validation I was getting from people that I considered to be mentors and stakeholders within the company. I knew that I was onto something and I wasn't going to give up. And for a long time, I felt like I was Chicken Little, yelling, running around, screaming that the sky is falling and nobody's listening to me. But eventually I got to the 5th VP to approve the idea in 5 minutes. And I think a key reason is because he was the one VP who was not from the US, he was from South Africa, and he instantly understood what I was saying and instantly understood the importance of what I was trying to convey. And so it was just having that persistent, that was a huge lesson in teaching me persistence, that, despite hitting that wall over and over again, being frustrated by these guys not listening to you, not just guys either, a variety of people just ignoring what you're saying, but you have to trust that if you might have a damn good idea, it just needs the right ears to hear it. And so just keep pushing forward. And I know for me, that was a huge lesson learned, but it was having the ears of friends and colleagues who also said, yeah, I think this is a good idea. You need to, don't stop, basically keep moving forward. And that was a great lesson to learn, because that stuck with me ever since then.
I love that, because each of you said something where I'm like, either I've learned something or I'm like, oh, you got to keep going. So Kate bringing up perseverance is super important, that all of those people who said no, you only needed the one yes. And I think that's super important. And then Christina, you bringing up like, hey, it's difficult to raise this money, but you're going to find the right people who are going to give you that. And then Jane bringing up the one thing that I guess I struggle with hugely is you don't have to react immediately to what's happening to you. I immediately, I think to myself, like, hey, I need to do something about this now. This is an injustice. You will not deny me of whatever it is that I think at that point in time. But I do think that it is important to have some kind of growth or reflection upon what's the best way to tackle this issue and be level-headed instead of being fiery, at least like how I typically hate that. That's super helpful. So I would love to take a slight transition here, but still very related to what we're talking about. And I would love to know, do you believe that this industry has evolved in terms of gender representation and inclusivity in recent years? And I'm sure the answer is yes, but I would love to know, like, to you all, in what ways, and then what do you think we still need to do to change some of the issues that we are seeing today?
I'm happy to just chime in on this one. The next month will be 30 years for me in games. That'll be my 30-year mark. And I can tell you that it has changed a lot, tremendously actually. But if you look at the stats, especially across different countries, the average number of women working in the industries across various markets, it's still really low. We're talking like 20%, 25% at most in most markets, which I consider to be pretty pathetic still, considering, that the number of gamers that are women representing is basically parity with men. And we've always had that goal of trying to see how can we get those who make games better reflect those who play them. And we're not there yet. And so I find myself being frustrated with that. At the same time, I'm really encouraged to see so much more representation. I think a lot of it, especially, is coming from the independent game space, where you see the democratization of game development is allowing more and more voices to express themselves through games. And that to me is incredibly exciting. I travel a lot, especially to a lot of emerging markets around the world, and just see tremendous talent, remarkable talent all over the place. And it's just so encouraging to me. And that wasn't happening before. That wasn't even 10 years ago. We did not see it to the degree that we see now. And so I think we now have a better foundation to get there than we did. We're not there yet, but I am encouraged overall. But to me, the biggest challenge that remains, and it's not just a game's unique problem, is that we need more underrepresented people in positions of decision-making and power. That's really, to me, what this industry lacks in a big way.
It's 100% right. And I agree with Kate. I think that when we launched Modus, which is our publishing label for independent studios and bringing independent studios content to market, the first time we met with everybody, I specifically remember I was at GDC. I was meeting with a bunch of different reporters, launching the Modus roadmap of the 4 titles that we had at the time that were going to come out over the next couple of years. And one of the reporters said to us, oh, all of your protagonists are female in your roadmap. And so how did you come to that decision? And we didn't even know. We didn't even know that the titles that we had chosen for the roadmap all had female protagonists. And it was because we weren't dismissing them. when we were going through the green light process, because there was a variety of people in the room making the decision of what games we were going to fund and what games we were going to bring to market, we were just looking at things other than who the protagonist was and what we were looking at. What do we like about this game? What gameplay do we like? What mechanic do we like? What story do we like? All of these different things. And we didn't even realize till after a reporter brought it up to us that we had actually chosen titles that all had a female protagonist. And so it was really interesting and it really, to me, shows how important it is to have a variety of people in the room. And what I mean by that is I'm very serious about a variety. I've used this example before, but you need a bunch of different shoes in the room, and the shoes need to look different because the shoes are actually more indicative, I think, of differences in worldview than a lot of the other things that we tend to lean on. And so I think it's important to have that so that you can really look at what things are, so that you remove common biases and you're open to more interesting content.
Yeah, I love all those points, and I don't know how much more I have to add, but I do think like the Me Too movement, and at least from my perspective, the Me Too movements and stuff like that have made a lot of good change. But then you have examples like Gamergate, which can feel pretty discouraging. But I think in my relatively shorter career in the game industry, it just feels there is progress being made every day. The fact that the three of us are here talking about this stuff in a forum, I think that's huge. And there's now examples in the industry of other women and other minorities that are carving a path, which I don't think there was a lot of when I was starting. That stuff gives me hope. And even though some of these moments in gaming history with the Me Too or the Gamergate feels really rough to go through, the fact that there are people pushing for change and progress, I think is very heartening too. And I feel like I see the conversations happening in gaming conferences and executive rooms and all that stuff about like, how do we handle this? So I think the fact that those conversations are happening, I think is a lot different than where we were like maybe 5-10 years ago, which is heartening. And I think in terms of what probably still needs to change is something that's already been mentioned by Kate and by Christina, which is who's making the decision, the biases going into it. I think could really still needs a lot of progress and change, but it's also, I think, our perception of gaming and gamers, right? Like the gaming market's $300 billion. Mobile games is actually 2/3 of that, which is a sizable chunk of that market. Women are a sizable chunk of the mobile gaming market. And yet there's like this persistent bias in the gaming industry to look at mobile games as, oh, casual, not a real gamer. And then there's this like subconscious like discounting of those gamers who happen to be mostly women. And I feel like that kind of decision making, that dismissal is what results in underinvestment in the quality of games and the quality of experiences, which just creates this weird self-perpetuating cycle. So I think all of that stuff is very tied in together. And I think you need to take the other half of the gender identity spectrum like seriously when you're thinking about experiences and product choices and not be limited to what you're used to.
I will say you answered the next question, but we're going to still tackle that one in a second. The other thing I would love to just say that I wish we could do more of is just giving more women and just underrepresented people in general the opportunity to go to conferences for free or at reduced price. Such a costly thing for people to actually go to. It just will continue to shut women out of these spaces.
That's one of the initiatives that WIGI is working really hard to solve is exactly what you just talked about, is making sure that there's programs that are out there that you can participate in through WIGI to be able to go to a bunch of different conferences. And they're running one right now for GDC, which is going to be in San Francisco at the end of the month. They run one for Gamescom. They just did one at DICE. And so there's a lot of, and so anybody who's out there, check out WIGI, and they have a lot of really great programs to help.
I would also just add to that, because I'm on the GDC advisory board, and I can tell you that we talk about this every single year, and there's a concerted effort that has been constantly expanding to make it more accessible to people from all over the place, not only people within the US who are underrepresented, but people from other cultures as well. There's a lot of issues that we deal with, visas, for example, for people who want to travel to the US for the conference. And a lot of work is done behind the scenes to enable them to come to the US by supporting their visas and things like that. And I know it's a conversation we have a lot. A lot of it's just the fact that it's in San Francisco. If we're talking about GDC, it's not a cheap place for any kind of conference. And that's something else we discuss every year as an advisory board. But the other thing too, I would just say on that note, is that there's a lot of fantastic small regional events all around the US and other countries as well that I would encourage people to take advantage of. There's a site called Game Conference Guide. I think it's something like Game
Did not know that.
confguide.com, I believe is the URL. But it lists stuff all over the world. It tells you if it's virtual, if it's in person. There's a lot of different ways out there to engage. So I would say, yeah, it'd be great if we could all go to GDC and Gamescom and all that good gigantic events, which are great. But at the same time, you can get it in tremendously great quality networking at really small events because they're smaller. People are not as distracted. So I would definitely look local too.
That is so nice to know because, again, that for me, you just bringing that up just opened up a whole world for me because I didn't know that. I've Googled for things and I could not find anything. And so just to know, I think you said gameconferences.com?
I think it's GameConf Guide. And I think there's like another like events for gamers it's called, but it has a lot of game industry events too.
That in itself like just closed the information gap for me and then probably anybody else who's watching this because just didn't know that existed. So now I'm going to tweak this question just a little bit because I just realized the way that I worded this can cause trouble. So instead of specifically saying which video game character has an issue, be very vague about this. But I would love if you could discuss, in your opinion, experiences of playing games or just seeing them where there's a female character that you didn't feel was authentically representative of the gender and or if it was reduced, the character was reduced to stereotypical roles. Do you think there's a correlation between the lack of representation and those stereotypes? And I feel like the answer is yes to that, but
yeah, I think that it's just broader than just video games. It's consistent across all forms of entertainment, whether that be music and the way that underrepresented or groups are reflected in the music that we listen to, the movies that we watch, the TV shows that we watch. I think we're all in the video game industry, so we're talking specifically about video games, but I just think that this is really common in almost all of the music that we listen to, almost all of the books that we read, almost all of the TV shows that we watch. But I think it's actually we are seeing a shift on this. And I agree with Jane that I think Me Too had a big kind of tent pole or whatever you want to call it, watershed event where we're like, there's more awareness. But let's talk about The Last of Us. You talk about The Last of Us, both from a TV show and a video game. We have a very rich depiction of relationships, of how people can be friends and support each other of very different walks of life, about how people are represented when they have no other choices and how do they behave and how much empathy do we have for them. I think that we're actually seeing a lot of that change in certain video games and in certain kinds of music and in certain kind of movies and TV shows. And so I think that historically there's always been stereotypes because people are lazy in writing. And but I think that we're seeing a lot of positive change in that area.
Yeah, I was gonna crack a joke about Samus from Metroid and just her weird body shape. But no, I agree. I think Last of Us is a great example too, because I think when we see something that feels not authentic or a stereotype, I think it's because there's not a lot of diversity in that representation, right? When you see the same type of woman with the same body shape reflected in all the tentpole AAA titles, you start to feel like, is that the stereotype that you have of this type of person? But I think the trick is, let's not get rid of that necessarily, but let's present a greater diversity of women, of non-binary people, of transitioning people. Let's just show that diversity to show that it exists and that it's fine, it's great, and it can be enjoyable. I think when you start seeing more diversity reflected into things, it feels less tropey because it is less of a trope.
Yeah. And this is something I deal with in my culturalization work like every day. And even this morning, dealing with the issue with Maori representation from the indigenous folks in New Zealand and how they're being represented in a sci-fi scenario. And even though it's distant future and everything, but still they want the character to be of Maori, from the Maori culture. And so how do you do that? And how do you do it accurately? Because there's certain elements that are being used in the character that makes them tied directly to that culture, and we want to make sure we do it in the right way. I'm really encouraged that in the last, I would say 5 to 7 years, so many companies now understand that it's critically important that you have to reach out to representatives of these cultures and ask them, how do you want to be represented? What is the right way to do it? I did a little bit of work on Never Alone, which was the game about the Inuit girl from northern Canada. And I love the fact that game was a direct partnership between the game development team and the tribal groups in Canada. And basically everything you see in that game was approved by the tribal groups. Nothing was frivolous, nothing was random. And I just think it was a great example. If you want to have great representation and done accurately and done well, just ask these groups, not just ask, but also, if you can, work directly with them and bring them into the process, and you get this magical result. And we're thankfully, again, because we're seeing more game development be democratized around the world, those groups themselves are picking up the skills to create the games themselves and don't necessarily have to be enabled by another, like a third party. But we're seeing more and more of that. I'm just encouraged that we're seeing more companies understand that the only way forward is to reach out and ask and get validation. Don't just assume, don't use stereotypes. Yeah, we still see that every once in a while. I work on a lot of different franchises, worked on all the Dragon Age games and Mass Effect and all that stuff. And even there, where it's a very progressive team that does a great job, I think, with the representation, even then, every once in a while, there's a little bit of a slip up that we catch before things go out the door. But it's just part of it is the fact that it speaks to the fact that all of us are biased.
Yeah.
Because we're from a specific geography, culture, language, etc. And all of us overcome that bias through education. But what I have found oftentimes in the creative process, that innate bias creeps into the process. And it's not that the artist or the writer really intends to use a stereotype, but they just don't know any better. And I think, to the point that was made, it feels lazy if you don't take the time to actually do the research, take that extra step. But thankfully, I'm seeing that more and more now. So I'm encouraged, at least.
I love what you just said. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Where she said that we all have bias that we address through education. And that is a really kind and empathetic way to get everybody on board with addressing their bias, is by saying, we all have it, we all deal with it, we all need to figure out how to do that, and this is how. It's through education. So I love that. Thank you.
Now, literally what I was going to say, I'm like, that was like the best sound bite ever. I just want to do the more you know rainbow pops across the screen. So Kate, you've already brought this up about how do you build and promote better representation of women in video games by talking about the Inuit community and the game that was created. But I would love to know from all of you, are there other things we can do to start helping promote better representation across the board? And it could even be and it doesn't have to be like, oh, you're a game developer and so now we're going to work with the community. It can even be just from the beginning of, let's learn how to hire interns better. Just those very simple, practical things as well. Don't worry, I can wait. And this is a tough question. I will say, I do think this is a tough question because there are so many things you can do to try to improve representation, but you could go anywhere with it.
One comment that I would mention, and it's something that I think all of us have heard before. We hear when, especially hiring managers who might happen to be male, say, we tried to find a woman to fill the role. We tried to find someone who's qualified, but we just can't find them anywhere. Are you bleeping kidding me? It's that kind of frustration. I hear that all the time. It's just, maybe you're just not looking hard enough, and maybe you're not thinking about where these conversations take place. For example, one of the aftermath of Gamergate is that a lot of women, a lot of us, are in secret groups, or we're in groups that are harder to find. And because we needed to create our own safe spaces during that time so that we could have conversations to support one another and get ourselves through all of this. And so a lot of those groups still exist. And so I can understand how it might be more difficult for someone outside the group to, how do I get word into that circle so that, hey, we have jobs available, hey, we're hiring. That doesn't excuse the fact that they can try harder to find the talent. I hear this all the time, that they're frustrated that they can't find, they want people who are underrepresented to apply to these jobs. They're like, we just can't find them. And yet we who are in these groups, we know the talent exists. We know that the networks exist. And so I see that disconnect in a lot of people who are just like, I don't know where to look, so therefore I'm just going to go with the white dude again, because there's plenty of those.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna jump on and say, I get that a lot from some peers that are like, how do you manage to hire so many like women and non-binary people, blah, blah, I can't find them, they don't exist. And I'm like, take a look at your website, take a look at your job description, take a look at your profile pages. Are you signaling at all that you're gonna listen to people that don't look like you? If not, they probably don't want to apply.
Yep.
And that's one of those things that, for example, Kate, when you brought up the hiring manager saying, we can't find them. In my head, I'm like, I don't quote me on the statistic because I can't remember, but I used to be a career coach. And people would always say, hey, women will apply if they have 100% of the job description. And a guy with 60, 50, 60%, I'm like, it's impossible that you didn't find someone. You personally didn't want that person there. And the bias that's there, it's just frustrating. And then to your point, Jane, there are plenty of positions I've applied to where I'm like, let me look at the team. White men. Okay, not going here because I think it's going to be hostile. And it may not be in the direct way, but then there are also things like microaggressions that come up every day that they don't know, that's chipping away at you when they say certain things. For me, it's a stressful moment to see those kind of things. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I would encourage people to give a little grace to organizations they have when they don't think that they see themselves represented, because there's a lot of organizations, such as my own right now, that is created from a bunch of different acquisitions. And so when you're looking at, I have my organization today, for example, we have teams in Bucharest, we have teams in Hungary, we have teams in Sweden, France, UK, US, and all of those were done through acquisition. And when you're doing that, you're taking the team that's there, and that team might not have had the same kind of priorities in the past that you have as an organization. So we shift all the time within the organization, is like the percentage of underrepresented groups that we employ shifts all over the place, because it's really hard to maintain a really good percentage when you're growing at scale and you're acquiring other companies. They don't all look like you. That could be that's an opportunity for change. It's an opportunity. So I think that give companies some grace. If you were interested in working there, then it doesn't look like everybody, there's somebody who's just like you. It still might be a really good opportunity, because we're trying very hard to change that and being really careful about the intentionality in which we hire.
And two things with that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please go.
I was just going to say two things with that. Very important point. One, you can always, when you interview, ask about the culture, understand what that is like, and understand that there are many different aspects of culture. It isn't just race or gender. There's class, there's disability, there's all of these things that you may want to know. You should ask those things. And then two, I know Neil deGrasse Tyson has nothing to do with this, but one of the most important things he's said, and I've been trying to do good at this, is just knowing that if you don't see somebody that looks like you, you need to be the person that you want the other people to see. And you can't let the lack of not seeing that person stop you from joining, because if that's the case, then it'll never happen. So take that in mind as well. Something that's very hard for me to do, but I do take that in stride as well. Christina, you totally brought up an important point, especially from the business side, because I think when you're like on the other side, you're like, where are the people at? Where do they look like? And to also be clear, even if they do look like you might not gel anyway. So you can't always go with that. You can't always go with that either.
I think too that even though it's an overused trope at this point, the Ted Lasso quote that "be curious, not judgmental," where a lot of us heard it for the first time in that show, I think it succinctly puts that we can ask questions. Why is it like that? Why are they not representing well? And I think that's a great point you raised, Christina, because of that. It's just find out. Maybe there's a lot of circumstances we just don't know. So, and to be fair, there's a lot of white dudes I know in this industry who are fantastic people, fantastic managers. So it's not like that's an instant no. We do have to ask those questions about why is it not diverse? And you never know. There could be reasons. Valid reasons, I should say.
Yeah. The three thoughts I just wanted to add onto this. I'd say, I wish I remember where the quote came from, but I remember listening to a female leader speak about her experiences, and she was just saying how In her mind, a strong female leader needed two strong arms, one arm to make way and the other arm to bring another woman with her, which I think was beautiful. And I think it's also, I think for people on the opposite end, like corporations and HR managers and the like, I think you also have to be wary that like having one of a certain minority alone in a group is hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Praise to them for being willing to be that person. But there's a lot of statistics that show as if you have two women in a group,
Yes.
like the amount of empowerment goes up exponentially because they, whether or not they necessarily get along, I don't want to repeat that whole like Silicon Valley episode or whatever, but I think the thinking is once you see other people that are in your same situation, it helps you get that confidence. But the other thing I wanted to add, not just on because the original question was about like promoting representation, right? Like in gaming. And I did want to add, at least on the content side of it too, I do feel that like in order to help, because I feel like diversity of womanhood is very important to increase the gender representation in gaming and all entertainment. I also want to say that I think diversity of representation of manhood is very important too. There is a spectrum on all sides of the gender thing. And so I think if you only show a very stereotypical machismo male, like you're perpetuating a certain stereotype that way, which kind of creates a necessity to have that counterbalance like female stereotype. So I'm just all for diversity. Let's get more creative than using these like standard tropes.
Awesome. So I have one last question because we are nearing the end and I don't want to keep you on here forever. This is really all about you. I would love to know, and I'm sure everybody else would too, looking back on your experiences thus far in the video game industry, what do you feel has been your greatest accomplishment and what do you hope to achieve in the future? And I know that last part is like, what? Like that's loaded, but I would still love to know. And I know it's tough, but let's start with the greatest.
I
No,
hope I
I was gonna
haven't
say
reached my greatest accomplishment yet. I hope my greatest accomplishment is to come. So we can say thus far. Let's say that, and so that we are. I think all of us are still looking at the future and what additional impact we can make on the industry. But I would say that one of the reasons I sold my company in December of 21. And to a publicly listed company. And then on the other side of that transaction became the CEO of the listed acquiring company. And so now there's just two in the Western world female CEOs of video game companies, me and Debbie Bestwick at Team 17. And so I feel like that is important. And although it's a lot harder than I thought, I will tell you guys, and I'm telling the world of whoever else listens to this today, is that it's different. It's different than I expected. It's a different skill set and it's harder than I thought that it was going to be because I've been running companies for a long time. I was like, I sold my company. I shouldn't have to work this hard kind of thing this year, but I want to keep going specifically because I want to be visible for people to understand that women can lead serious business-focused video game companies within this industry. And I think that it shouldn't be two of us. Like Janie, you were talking about how big the industry is and how many women are playing games in this industry. And it's just a huge part of global entertainment. And there's two women running listed companies. That's not enough. And so that's the greatest accomplishment thus far. Hopefully my greatest accomplishment will be reaching a point where there's 50% of the companies are run by women.
Yeah, I don't know. In my case, I would say greatest accomplishment. It's hard. Creating my team at Microsoft was a big deal for me personally. There's a lot of stuff that I've done which is a big personal accomplishment. But to me, the only real measure for me of accomplishment is the impact on other people around us. Like every chance I've had to mentor someone, every time I've seen that person get the job that they talked about wanting, getting the promotion or being on the path that they want to be on, any of that is just amazing to me. Yes, I have a daughter and I'm just incredibly proud of everything she's doing, but then every one of these other interactions feels like that too, where you're mentoring some younger person and they make their achievement and you're just like, yes, that's exactly what you want. And even in my culturalization work, every moment I can think about over all these years where we had a teachable moment where somebody realized, oh yeah, okay, maybe I should be thinking about that more often, or maybe I should think about the design before I drop in a stereotype, or all those different moments across so many games, so many franchises, I see as a collective achievement because it all influenced somebody to think a little bit differently the next time. And that to me is ultimately what it adds up for me. So I wouldn't really say it's one thing. in particular. I guess it's the overall opportunity to have that kind of influence would be the achievement, in my view.
Yeah. Man, this is such a hard question to answer, I think.
Very loaded.
Yeah. I think, like, at the risk of being a bit cheesy, but it's like, for me, like, the work in progress greatest achievement is every time, like, I get feedback from the folks that I work with that they're finally at a place that listens or that they enjoy coming to work every day. That to me it may just be within my team and all that stuff and much smaller than the teams that you guys lead. But like, to me, all that stuff really matters because I didn't want to create a game studio that just was a rinse and repeat of everything that I've experienced in the past. And I really was hoping to start to create an environment that felt different. It's not wildly different. I'm not going to lie. It's not like Shangri-La. It's got its problems. But the hope is that just by being me and just by trying to lead this company, that I am in some small way driving some change in the way things are done in the industry is really hopeful to me. And I think that the accomplishment I hope to achieve in the future, I'm going to be like raw and honest. Like I am hoping for commercial success, like crazy, unbelievable commercial success with our products. Yes, because I want money, it would be nice, like, not gonna lie. I think moreover, I'm convinced that in order to really drive change, you not only have to, if you want to drive change as a kind of agents of difference, you can't just be different and be like, I did it. Like, you have to show people that it's a model that works, that is successful. You have to prove to the investors that this is an investable thing, like difference, diversity. These ideas are investable and they have great returns. And I think absent that, we're not going to really be able to see the change at the scale that I hope to see it.
Excellent. So before we end and I do the outro, just a reminder, everybody who didn't show up earlier, tomorrow we are having this incredible team up with Benefit Cosmetics for a charitable live stream event. So join us tomorrow at March 8th at 10 a.m. Wow, PM. Don't come PM. AM, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to follow, join us for some fun and show your support. So with that outro, I hope this open world dialogue has provided you all with valuable insights into the experiences of working in the video game industry and just the larger tech industry as well. From discussing challenges faced in the industry to exploring strategies for success, we hope we helped shed light on such an important topic. As the video game industry continues to grow, it is important to foster a culture of inclusivity and diversity to support the contributions of all individuals. I'm Robin Mosley. This is Open World Dialogue. I'm signing off. Bye and happy gaming, everyone.